unbelievable task of keeping you all awake, so try that. This morning I wanted to talk to you about keeping things simple when we make decisions. Something that I do in my business. In fact, I tend to, when we design software, we tend to get to the point where I think, this can't be right. It's too simple. There's no way this accomplishes what it needs to. And when I get to that point, we do, then we know we've succeeded. We've gotten to where we need to be from a user standpoint. So I want to back up a little bit and tell you about how this philosophy of keeping things simple it works in my life. It's worked in business decisions, life decisions, and has helped me get to where I am today. Start off with a story of how this concept hit me. Growing up, my father was a little bit older. He had me when he was 40. So, you know, he was a pretty successful businessman by the time I could remember what he did. He was a brilliant man. He went to Princeton for mechanical engineering. He got a master's degree in business from George Washington. Early in his life, he worked for Westinghouse Elevator Corporation, putting elevators in skyscrapers, the Empire State Building. But when I remember him being in business, he was a consultant for a company. This company, I don't remember the name of the company, they bought up food companies, people that manufactured food-related machinery. And so, you know, I remember he did well. He traveled a lot. He was he went to these different companies and helped them out. And so one point at which I thought I was maybe mature enough to understand what exactly my father did in a car ride somewhere, I was probably 10, 11, 12, probably looking back. I asked him, I said, Dad, can you tell me just what it is you do? You know, curiosity to me was, what do you do that's making, you know, we live pretty well, so it's kind of like, what do you do so well? And so he laughed and he said, well, you'd think it'd be hard to explain, but it's not. He said, this last week when I went on this trip, he went down to a company down south, and his boss was asking him to go to this new company they just purchased. It was failing. And he said, they asked me to go into this company. They made coffee grinders. He said, the kind of the grocery store, so when you buy whole bean coffee, you would pour your whole bean coffee, and this was a hand grinder. You had to do it yourself and put out your ground coffee. And he said, so I went in there, and I knew they were in terrible trouble. And he said, so I walked in the door, and they knew I was coming. And they had a conference room set up, and so they gave me coffee. And then for 4 hours, proceeded to send in the financial officer, the marketing officer, the HR person, who had all this information for me about why the company was failing. It was failing because they had too many people on staff, because their technology, you know, maybe things were moving to, you know, electronic coffee grinders, all these reasons and stuff. And my dad said, he told me, he said, you know, after about 4 hours of this, I was just done. It was too much information for me. And I asked him if I could just go see where they made the coffee grinders. And so he said they walked back out to the manufacturing facility, and he asked to see the shop foreman, and the shop foreman comes out. He was an older gentleman, said he'd been there 22 years, and he pretty much knew how everything worked. And so my dad said, can you show me how you make a grinder? And he said, I walked up to this start of the assembly line, and the man said, well, this is where we make the handles. It's a little wooden piece with an arm and a gear, and so we put the handles together. And he said, great, show me how you make them. And the man rustled around for a little bit, and he found a box, and he pulled out a wooden handle, and he started making one. My dad looked over and he said, I told him, I said, so where do you keep the handles? And I said, well, I have some here, but when we get them in, they usually come into that door. Except we have another supplier that doesn't have a small enough truck, or his truck's too big to go back to that door, so he puts them over here. We have some boxes over there. And he said, and then sometimes when these are not finished right or sanded, we have a sanding machine over there, so they're over there, over there, over there. And I actually looked at him like, really? And he said he proceeded to go through the assembly line, and the whole process was just like that. No one knew where anything was. No one knew how to find things when they needed them. And so from a usability standpoint, designing software, it's very similar. You know, you need to put things in front of people when they need it. That's how you make things simple. And he said, son, that's exactly what I do. I came in and I retooled their manufacturing, and the company's doing much better, or will do much better. And I remember being completely dumbfounded. Like, there's no way in the world my father, who's so successful that, you know, I'm a 13-year-old kid or whatever I was, I could do that. I could go and tell people that they couldn't find parts in the right spot. So that story still sticks with me, because I just remember you know, obviously I'm sure he was simplifying it for me, but he said in all honesty that was it. And I said, you know, why do you think that is? Why do you think that company, all those people created all that information? He said, son, sometimes people think that complicated problems have to have complicated solutions. It has to be. It just can't be that simple. And it can be. So that stuck with me. And when I first started my career, I went to art school. My first job was for a local television station here in Indianapolis as an art director. And I remember one of the first things I had to do, probably a week into the job, was I actually had to design newspaper ads. So for those of you who don't know what newspapers are, the big paper things that fold out. And it used to be the way that you'd find, besides TV Guide, which was a printed application, you could find out what was on TV by looking at these giant full-page ads of what the television station was going to show that week. And so I remember sitting down as a designer, and they said, okay, here's your job. I need to design the ad for next week. We didn't have computers at that point in time. Yes, I am old. And they said, you need to go around and ask all the people, here's what people you need to see at the station, because they're going to tell you what they want in the ad. And so I went over and I spoke to the sales guy, and the head of sales said, oh, it's most important that we take these 4 sponsors and we put their logos on the ad. And I went over to the promotions department, and they said, well, we got to have a lineup, and we have a contest in the afternoon. I want people to know how to enter the contest and all the rules of the contest. And we have a kids club where kids can go to a fast food restaurant and get a card, so we got to have that on there. And I went on for like an hour, and I wandered around the station. I remember coming out to my desk and sat there, and I was paralyzed in fear. How am I supposed to design an ad? I had 85 things that everybody wanted on this. The news team wanted a giant picture of their pretty news people with, ratings on there. We're #1 in the market. And I thought, there's just no way I can do this. But I calmed down after a little while, and I said, I think I need to simplify this. And I'm going to have to make some tough decisions about what's in and what's out. But in the end, what really matters with this ad is, their sponsors may be important to somebody. Different things are important to different people at the station. But in the end, the only thing that's really important is people see the ad and find out what's on TV, and they watch TV. If they don't watch TV, then the whole ad's for naught. So I sat there and I made a decision. I actually go through this process when I used to design a lot. I don't do a whole lot lately, but I put everything that I needed out on there. So I brought the photographs I was going to use. I had logos. I typed up every bit of text that had to go in the ad, put it all out in front of me. I didn't design, and I started to think about what I could get rid of. And so I had duplicate logos. I threw text away. I wasn't putting contest rules. I wasn't, all these things. And I boiled it down to what was really important for that user to see when they read the ad. And so it was tough. I went back to the people that asked me to do the ad and said, this is the ad. And they said, well, what happened to all this stuff? And I said, well, I couldn't fit it in, and it's not important. It's not important in this ad. What's important is for people to see the ad and watch TV, right? And I was probably 19, 20 years old at that point, or whatever I was. So I'm sure they didn't like listening to me, but they did, and it was pretty successful at that. So that process for me continues. Later on in life, when I started my company, well, just before I started my company, actually, I'll tell you a story about how this happened in my life to the same decision. I was presented with an opportunity about 15, 16 years ago to move to Europe with my family. I had a daughter who was in kindergarten, a son who was just an infant, a wife who had never really left the state of Indiana. And I was presented one day with a decision that said, hey, I got to know by Friday, it was Wednesday, do you want to move your family to Paris, France for 3 years? So, initial reaction is, woohoo, great, awesome. And so I came home and I presented this opportunity to my wife, who had the same reaction, but then of course we had questions. What does that mean? Move to Paris, France. So we came up with a list of questions, and we had a huge list of questions when I came back to work the next day. What do we do with our cars? What do we do with our house? How am I going to get paid? Do I use the same bank? Do I keep my bank? Do I close my bank? What do I drive over there? Where do we live? How do we find a place to live? So this went on and on and on. And I remember spending about a day at the office thinking about this, and I had a gentleman that I worked for that I admire greatly, and he said to me one day when I was asking him some of these questions, and it was maybe Thursday at this point, right? He said, Mark, you need to stop. You need to stop worrying about all those things. What's the most important decision right here for you today? And I thought about it, and I said, well, probably, is it a good opportunity for me in my career? Is it a good opportunity for my family, from a life standpoint? And he said, exactly. The rest of it, you don't need to worry about it. It'll happen. It'll happen. It is a lot. If you get overwhelmed with all the things that have to happen for you to make that decision, and you forget about the objective of, is it good for my job? Is it good for my family? You're going to say no. You're going to get scared. You're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to say no, and you're going to miss out. And that stuck with me too. So today, when we design software at the company I work for, this process continues for us now. We design business applications for people. And so we come into a big company, and they have a very large process they need to follow. And typically, and some of these projects are pretty big in terms of the money they spend. And so, when a company's spending a lot of money and they're starting with a new piece of software to help improve their workflow, of course everybody in the company thinks it needs to do everything for everybody. It has to solve this person's job. And this person does this, so let's make sure it does this, and it does that, and it does this. And so our process is, I go in and we listen. We sit down, we listen, we interview everybody, we talk about it, we hear all the business requirements that they say the software has to accomplish. And then when I come back, usually in front of them, I focus on, okay, who's the user? Who are your primary users, and what are the 1 or 2 primary objectives you want this software to accomplish? Don't tell me everything it has to do it for everybody. And so when we boil that down and they say, well, the biggest thing that we could do is X and Y. Then when I go back and I start sketching and our team starts working on that software, I can literally say when I do this process, I'll sketch and I'll make up an interface and I'll start thinking about the user's perspective on how they're going to interact with this web application. And I start drawing buttons and things and think, oh, if you could do this, if you go to this list. And inevitably, 6 or 7 times, I end up just crumpling up that first piece of paper and throwing it away. Because it got so complicated, I can't even figure out what I was supposed to do. And so I throw something away and I say, you can't do that too. At least in this view that I'm drawing out, it can't do this too. And I boil it down to where I finally get to the point where I think this actually accomplishes that 1 or 2 main objectives that has to happen on this screen. And I have that sensation of, this is way too simple. There's no way in the world this actually could work. And there's fear to that. There's fear to going back to the client and saying, this is it, because I'm afraid I've forgotten something. But inevitably, there is a reaction on their part typically of, wow, this is really simple. Wait a minute, does it? Yeah, it does. Does it? Yep, it does. And so, that process has worked for us greatly doing software. I think in life it has helped me, even in a smaller sense, make progress in my life. I don't know how many of you are familiar with sailing, but when you sail a ship, you don't go from point A to point B. Like, you can pick a spot and say, I'm going to sail to that island over there. And in a sailboat, you don't sail from here to there. You have to judge the wind, the ocean. You have to make decisions about how that's affecting your course. And many, many times in your journey to that point, you've got to change directions to try to get yourself there. And I have friends and family. I've done fairly well, been successful I've had this business for 13 years. I've had friends and family say to me, did you know when you first started that you'd get where you are today? I'd love to be smart enough to say, absolutely. I wrote it all out and I'm here. But that's not the case. I knew generally where I wanted to go, the kinds of things that I wanted to do, the kinds of the size of the company I wanted to have, a bunch of factors that I knew were my goals. And throughout my journey in this company, I've had people, I've had decision points. I've had places where I'm forced to make a decision. Something big has happened, I need to make adjustments. And so I do this same exact process. I sit down and I say, there's a lot of factors in this, and a lot of factors that I worry about. Maybe it's having to reduce staff. Maybe it's about moving offices or new equipment or even bigger decisions. And so I do the same thing. I gather all the information that I can about that decision point. I put them all in front of me. And then I boil it down to what is really important in this case. And in the case of my journey in my company, which of these 1 or 2 things is going to help me stay on my goal of where I want to be. And so I do that process. I simplify. I get down to what's most important. And I don't forget that, and I make a decision. And I've probably done that in 13 years of business. I would guess I've done that 10, 12 times, major decisions of changing course, but just continuing on the path. And so I challenge, so I know in life and in business, and everybody has different degrees of decisions, but I challenge you to think about complicated situations. When you've got a complicated decision to make in business, in life, in school, whatever it may be, and you feel overwhelmed, and you're worried about other people's feelings, and you're worried about things, I want you to think about the process of simplifying that decision for yourself. Take everything and lay it out in front of yourself and say, what are all the things I'm worried about? It's good to put them all down. Put them all down and put them all out in front of you and say, all right, now I need to go through the process of boiling this down to what is really 1 or 2 or 3 most important things I need to worry about. And at that point, when you boil it down to that, I found that you can't make a bad decision. Most of the decisions you make at that point, when you've really gone through that exercise, are good decisions and will help you stay where you're going to go. So I thank you for your time. Nobody snoring? All right.